This is the Holy Gospel according to St. Mark, the 7th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. Jesus set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there. Yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of Syrophoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." She answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For saying that you may go, the demon has left your daughter." So she went home, found the child lying on the bed, and the demon gone. Then he returned from the region of Tyre, and went by the way of Sidon, towards the Sea of Galilee, in the region of the Decapolis. They brought to him a deaf man who had an impediment in his speech. They begged him to lay his hand on him. He took him aside in private, away from the crowd, and put his fingers into his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. Then he looked up to heaven, sighed, and said to him, "Ephphatha," that is, "be opened." And immediately his ears were opened, his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. Then Jesus ordered them to tell no one, but the more he ordered them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. They were astounded beyond measure, saying, "He has done everything well. He even makes the deaf to hear and the mute to speak." The Gospel of the Lord. So one of the challenges of reading the Bible is that the stories are often filled with the names of places which are simply unknown to us. We don't know where they are. We don't know who lived there. It's not even clear a lot of the time why the biblical writers bothered to write the names of these places down anyway. Today, in our Gospel reading, we read about Tyre and Sidon and the Decapolis. Commingled in there was also a passing reference to the Sea of Galilee, which at least most of us have heard of, and so it seems sort of familiar to us. But what about these other three places? Mark doesn't tell us anything about them. And for most of us, they're just more unknown places in the Bible. Yet for the first readers of Mark's Gospel, these wouldn't have been unknown places, but they would have been unexpected places. Why, they would ask, would Jesus go to these places? What was he doing there? Why did he drag his disciples along? And actually, who were these people that Jesus was helping? This story was filled not so much with the unknown, but with the unexpected. For reasons Mark never elaborates on, Jesus is in unexpected places. There is really no reason for Jesus to need to go to any of these places, Tyre or Sidon or the Decapolis. Unlike some of the stories we read where Jesus is in Samaria because he physically has to go there in order to get between Galilee and Jerusalem, there's no reason that he needs to be in those places. Nobody would be looking for him there. It's not a place anybody would expect Jesus to go. And yet, here is Jesus in these unexpected places. For reasons that Mark does not elaborate on, Jesus helps unexpected people. For most of Mark's Gospel, Jesus goes about helping the children of Israel. So why is he among people who aren't Jewish? Jews and the pagan peoples who surrounded them didn't much like each other, and they did not expect to be helped by one another. Even the Syrophoenician woman seems to think that the best she can do is maybe to get some crumbs. But she ends up with the same level of help as everybody else. It's not what anybody was expecting. And for reasons that Mark does not elaborate on, Jesus works in unexpected ways. You know, you'd think that by now Jesus would have a basic way of doing healings. That would be most efficient, and it would also let people know what to expect if Jesus was going to heal you. And yet, when Jesus heals, there's almost always something unexpected. After all, if Jesus can simply tell the Syrophoenician woman, "Go home, your daughter's fine," without even going near the house, you'd think that he would find this guy who's deaf and has an impediment in his speech, and all he'd have to do is go, "Be healed," and the guy would be healed. But instead, there is this, frankly, kind of gross thing about taking him aside, sticking his fingers in his ear and spitting and touching his tongue and all this kind of stuff that, especially during COVID, they wouldn't let you do. And yet, it's not what Jesus had done before. It's not what Jesus, as far as I can tell, ever did again. It's totally unexpected in the context of these healing stories. The other thing about these stories is that Jesus did not go into these unexpected situations alone. He dragged his disciples along. It's not clear whether they were excited about this or not. That's another thing that Mark doesn't tell us about. But what is clear is that by dragging his disciples along to these unexpected situations, Jesus intended that his disciples, both then and now, should be open to experiencing Jesus' presence in unexpected places. And that's true even and maybe especially if that place is not a physical place. You know, over this past year and a half, we have all become used to finding faith, fellowship, and community online. It was done from necessity, but along the way, many of us actually found that Jesus was there with us, even if online is not the place that we always want to be. And as with those first disciples, hopefully that experience can help us to be more aware of how Jesus can and will be with us in the various places of our lives that, at least at first, we do not expect him to be. And sometimes we don't expect Jesus to be in these places because, frankly, we don't want to be in those places. Whether that place is a physical place we would just as soon not be, a virtual place, or an emotional place where we don't like being. And yet, this story reminds us that Jesus is going to be there with us, even in those unexpected places. And if we can start to recognize that, then it's also the case that maybe we can see ourselves as people who can help others experience Jesus in places where they don't expect Jesus to be either. By dragging his disciples along with him, it's clear that Jesus intended his disciples, both then and now, to be open to helping people who do not expect Jesus' help. Or at least, they don't expect followers of Jesus to be the people who care for them or help them. You may have seen the link in our emails about ways that we can partner with Lutheran Social Services to help resettle Afghan allies who we've been watching be airlifted out of Afghanistan. Actually, Lutherans have been involved in refugee resettlement since the Second World War, when, frankly, a lot of the refugees were Lutherans. That's how we got into it. But we stuck with it, and we got good at it. We even kind of got famous for it. And Lutherans have therefore ended up being the people who help a lot of people who came from places which, like Afghanistan, many people there who came from some of these places did not think Christians would be the people to help them. They didn't expect the help to come from us. So if you've seen there's a 2008 Clint Eastwood movie, Gran Torino. If you watch that movie, it's a set-up story about Clint Eastwood plays this crotchety old Korean War veteran who's now surrounded by Hmong refugees who have been resettled in his neighborhood someplace in the Midwest. And at one point in the movie, he's giving a ride to the daughter of one of his neighbor's family, and he says, why did you end up coming here anyway? And she talks about, well, during the Vietnam War, we fought on your side, and then the communists tried to kill us all, so we came here. And he says, well, fine, but how did you end up in the Midwest where there's snow on the ground 6 months out of the year? What people would actually decide they want to come here? And she answered, well, the Lutherans brought us here. And that was where one of his good lines is, the Lutherans. Everybody blames the Lutherans. But people got helped by folks that they did not expect would help them. And the thing is, when Jesus helped people who didn't expect to be helped by him, whether it was a pagan guy who was deaf or a Syrophoenician woman, it changed their impression of who Jesus was. And when Jesus' followers help people who don't expect us to help them, it does the same thing. And by dragging his disciples along with him, Jesus clearly intended in these unexpected places to make sure that his disciples, both then and now, understood that he was inviting them to be open to living our faith in unexpected ways. And sometimes that simply means living into new routines or being willing to change our routines. By this point in the gospel stories, the disciples, they kind of had settled into a routine. They traveled around Galilee, they taught in the synagogues, they healed people they knew, and they went up and went to the next place, and that was the routine. But now, Jesus changed the routine on them. Go to different places, work with people they didn't know, and do healings in different ways. It wasn't all that different, but it was a different routine and a different schedule. In our personal, professional, and church lives right now, a lot of what we're adapting to is new routines. Things have been shaken up for us, and whether it's working from home some of the time or all of the time, online classes, or just changing the times of worship and classes at church, our routines have been upended. Our schedules have had to adapt. I got to tell you, often, most of the time, in fact, I really don't like it when my routines and schedules are messed with, and I know that I am not alone. But today's gospel reminds us that sometimes the new routines and the different kinds of schedules are precisely where Jesus is leading us and needing us to go. As I said before, I'm not sure the first disciples of Jesus were all that thrilled by the unexpected situations into which Jesus dragged them. Honestly, I am not all that thrilled about some of the unexpected situations that I have been living through lately either. And maybe that's true for you too. But today's gospel reading reminds us that even when we're in unexpected places in our lives, Jesus promises to be there with us. The story reminds us that Jesus calls us to be his agents of hope and healing in the lives of people who don't expect Jesus or his followers to be of help. And most of all, the story reminds us that Jesus will continue to lead us and walk with us through all of the unexpected routines and unexpected changes that we need to deal with. Amen.